That was horrible. Anyway, learning. So we're moving the camera. Man, I got thrown off. So, Hot Take Nation, DRW here. Welcome back to another episode. Live, obviously, no recording. We have Nick Williams on, so I want to transition right to Nick because, I mean, all discombobulated. I need to have my little beverage here. Let's bring Nick in, Glenn. Yes, there we go. My man, how you doing?
I'm doing well, man. How are you?
Doing good. So, thank you for joining us on the live show with a little drama on the intro. DRW changing cameras and mixing things up. I'm back in Denver. I've been in Arizona for 5 weeks. We just got back, and I got a little bit too cute with my setup in the studio. So, Nick, how you doing? How are you hanging in for a little coronavirus time?
Man, life is good. We're just plugging along, adjusting, adapting, and overcoming. And we got two boys doing their e-learning. We've got we're trying to figure out what this rig count's going to do. We're trying to adapt from a professional standpoint and just make sure the kiddos are safe as well. So.
Yeah. One of the things I've been noticing on LinkedIn, which I really enjoy, you've always been an incredibly positive person, and I love that about you. And you've started a video segment on LinkedIn called, I think, Friday Freebies.
Yep.
Talk to me about that and how that's going and the feedback and what you're trying to do with it beyond, obviously sharing a message.
Yeah, I mean, the feedback's been incredible. We've had a lot of views, and kind of like you and I have talked about how Hot Take started. It was just, I wanted to put myself out there a little bit, and I had some things on my mind. Mine wasn't necessarily done out of spite. Mine was done more because I felt like I needed to be doing something, right? I started with a new company in January, a new company for me. I started with Leem in January, and then all this hit, and I'm sitting here trying to figure out how I can make an impact, and so that's what spurred the Friday Freebies. And throughout the week, I've been trying to do a lot of reading and different, pick a different book every week, a different kind of genre, I guess. And then, through conversations with different people, just whatever comes up through that week they're always, to this point, knock on wood, a theme has popped up almost every week. And that's kind of how I go with it on Friday. And that's why I wait till Friday, because the week kind of helps me make what the content's going to be. So pretty free flowing. And I've been thrilled with the amount of response it's gotten, and it's gone really well.
Good. Well, I mean, you obviously have a great reputation in industry, and one of the things we've talked about historically when you were on our first episode, it was actually, I think it was episode 3, Glenn, something like that. But we had you and your wife on to talk about the charity and the way that oil and gas has, comes together in times of crisis. And, I've seen some jokes, and it's true. Greenpeace isn't donating to the food bank, and a lot of oil and gas companies, Exxon, others are really actively involved in the community and maintain active involvement in the community. Why don't you tell people who don't know about your charity, just a quick overview of the story and what you guys do and the status of the golf tournament this summer?
Absolutely, man. I appreciate the opportunity to do so. Down for a Cure was started 4 years ago, and we have, my wife and I have 3 sons. We've got a 9-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 3-year-old. And my 9-year-old and 3-year-old both were born with cystic fibrosis. And my youngest was also born with Down syndrome. So for the first 9 years, for the first few years of our marriage, and when Jackson was born, we were very, very involved with the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, and we continue to be to this day. But when the second piece of Down syndrome was added to the mix, I guess you could say, we decided it was time for us to do something. And it really started out as a place for our family members to give their money and give their support so that they didn't have to do the type of research that Aaron and I just by being parents of kids. My younger Bill, he got involved, and we started Down for a Cure. And the first thing that we did was, he and I both like to hit the golf ball around the course, so we wanted to do a golf tournament. And we did our first golf tournament, what would be 4 years ago now, and it was about 100 people, and we did it at the ranch. And we have since outgrown the Ranch Country Club, which is just a 18-hole course, and now we've moved it to Riverdale, which is just down the road from our house, and it's two 18-hole courses. And last year we were, I think, 6 people shy of filling two 4-person teams per hole on both courses. So almost 300 golfers. We raised over $107,000 last year, and it's just been tremendous. And I would say, I always tell everybody, 95% of that group is oil and gas related. They have something to do with the industry. I've met them through the industry. They know somebody that knows me. I've got so many advocates, the Hot Take Nation, Jameson Parker with Rocky Mountain Wireline Services. The list goes on and on. Extreme, the guys over at Extreme have been very generous and helpful every year. And then QES last year, who was my employer at the time, was unbelievable last year, and Barrel Bits. Just so many. There's too many to name, but it has become bigger than we've ever imagined. And what we do with the funds, no one gets paid. It's still my wife, my brother, and myself, and no one gets paid. We don't get it, but we use opportunities like this to share our message, and because people, it's amazing how many people are connected with somebody with either cystic fibrosis, even though it's pretty rare, and Down syndrome, and we want to help the smaller families, the smaller people that just don't necessarily, the Rocky Mountain Down Syndrome Association does a great job. Cystic Fibrosis Foundation did a great job, but we've been able to help some individual families just by donating funds, and it's been tremendous. So.
Well, I'm very happy to be part of it. I was very blessed to get to spend time with your wife and you. And if you haven't heard that episode, go back in the archives and listen to it. I wanted to get Nick out because, again, I think in this time, it's sometimes hard to stay positive and stay on the optimistic side, and it's something I've really been working on. For good or for bad, my brand has been a form of straight shooting, no bullshit, and there hasn't been a lot of great things to talk about of late. So I really appreciate what you're doing, and as a follow up, I think we announced it. But the Hot Take Nation, as a result of the book sales and a matching family donation, we've given $2,500 to the Down for a Cure, and I'm just so proud to associate myself with that. So want to thank you for coming on, Nick. Love everything you do, and look forward to us being able to swing the club and doing some more things for the charity and keep up the Friday freebies. I think they're awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah. So August 7th, we're still planning on having the golf tournament this year. So if you guys, we've got a bunch of people signed up already. So we're going to do everything we can to make it happen, and continue to spread the love, and really appreciate you. And thank you so much again for your generosity and your donation.
Of course. Thank you so much. All right, cool. So a live show. I love it. Okay, I'm settling in. I was a little discombobulated there at the beginning. We had some serious technical difficulties. I apologize for that. In our podcast, we'll figure it out. So I can get back on script to what I wanted to talk about before we bring Breezy in. And I think if you didn't listen to the episode with Breezy Carlson, we talked about legal requirements around shut-ins and some of the considerations that companies do in force majeure, not force majeure. And so Breezy's going to come in and we're going to follow up. But actually, you know what, Glenn, let's bring her in while I talk about this first piece, which is proration units in Texas. Breezy, what's going on? How are you?
I'm fabulous. How are you?
I'm doing well. We had a little technical difficulty, sort of threw me off. I'm relocating, but this is, you got to roll with the punches. Isn't that what we say?
You got to roll with the punches and maybe have a 12-year-old on hand to help you work the computers and the Zooms and things.
Yeah, I know. I mean,
significantly more apt than I am.
Well, in this day and age, I think just having Zoom issues is sort of like the deal, right? Like 6 months ago, if you had a dog barking or something in the background, people would be like, you should quiet that. But now you have like kids crawling over you. Some municipal guy, like who worked for a city, the cat kept coming into the screenshot and he threw the cat across the room, and it upset everybody. So he had to resign. And I mean, like if you had told him 6 months before that he was going to have to resign his job for throwing his cat because he couldn't leave the house, it'd be crazy. I wouldn't believe it.
So you're saying it's frowned upon to like throw a child during a meeting for interrupting you?
I mean, it's not great. It's certainly not great. But so I'm glad we can have some follow up and chat a little bit about what's been going on last week. One of the things that came out, and I don't know if you saw it this morning, but the RRC did come out with what I think looks like the ruling on proration. And so effective May 5th, for companies less than 1,000 barrels a day, no worries. But they did deem that producing in this environment is actually considered waste. And so they've implied, I can't really understand the calculations, but they've effectively put in proration calculations for Texas producers, which obviously is going to have some impact on cutting production. I'm curious, since the episode, the feedback you've got on additional clients looking out for shut-ins or any concepts that you want to talk about today.
There's a lot of really interesting stuff going on right now. I think there's two in particular that caught my eye in the last 48 hours. One is, I don't know if you saw a letter out of Oklahoma asking that Trump declare COVID oversupply an act of God. COVID specifically, the act of God, oversupply, the act of oversupply. And in an effort to boost our force majeure claims and substantiate those, I'm not really sure how I feel. I think a lot of the dialogue is celebratory on that letter in particular, which I think is great. I'm a big fan of proposed solutions instead of talk about problems. But I think one thing that I feel is missing from the conversation about this particular letter and about this particular solution is the fact that a declaration by the executive that COVID is an act of God, while helpful as evidence, does not necessarily impact our private contracts. So just because that happens does not mean you can turn around and look at every fee lease and say, oh, we're good. It only will apply to leases where such a declaration is a permissible event under your particular force majeure clause. So I think it's kind of like, in my opinion, possibly like purchasing crude for storage. It might be an incremental step towards the solution, but it's not the solution. And I think people need to be very aware that relying, if there were such a declaration to be made, relying on the same would still be inherently risky. And before you would rely on it, you would need to confirm that it truly is within your privately contracted force majeure provisions.
So I always feel like I'm the translator. I'm like, if you remember that show Home Improvement, where like Wilson would say like a whole bunch of really smart things to Tim Allen, and Tim Allen would hear them, and then he'd be like, I think what you said is they've done a thing, but it's complicated and it doesn't really solve the issue. How'd I do on the translation?
You did very well. If we could, you know how they can turn you into a potato or whatever, maybe we could put a little fence right here.
Yeah. Oh man, I wish we had like those screen, like sort of like Snapchatty kind of like facial things filters that I could confirm. So as an aside, speaking of filters, now I know you have some views on the coronavirus. We're not going to really talk about it. I'm going to leave those off to the side. But did you see Governor Abbott is allowing restaurants in Texas to open to 25% capacity?
I did see that.
It's pretty exciting, right?
I mean, it seems to me that there have been kind of an abundance of rumblings, and that the we need to do something position is in fact gaining traction, whether that looks like we're coming to terms with our own fear or whether we're just sick of our families. I can't be sure the cause. I know my biggest concern this morning was when the Restoration Hardware outlet's going to open.
Oh,
so I think maybe everybody just has spring fever, but I did see it, and I do think it's going to gain traction. I think we're gonna start opening.
So you made a comment on my LinkedIn post yesterday around sort of getting back to life, and it is interesting because there's a lot of bias that goes into even one's own personal view. So one of my best friends in the world came over last night. Of course, we stayed socially distanced in the backyard with his wife, and we sat around until 11 socially distancing while drinking wine. And it is amazing how visceral the reaction to coronavirus is, and also like how aligned. So like people who are getting a salary versus not, people who are getting more on unemployment insurance versus not, people who have healthcare, don't have health. Like you can really cut down the lines of like who is impacted and how they respond to it. And you made a comment on you had melanoma as well. And I had melanoma, different. You had one, I had one. So like different, but your experience was you faced your mortality. I know that's how I felt. And so do you think that informs your view on sort of the coronavirus and risk as a person? Because I've been thinking about that a lot since you posted that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I probably always have been a person who is not particularly prone to fear. So I don't think that one event was determinative of how I've reacted to the coronavirus specifically. I probably would have been somewhere on the spectrum of where I am now regardless. But I do think that there is something very freeing about having to work through being faced with your own mortality. And when it's something like melanoma or cancer or a really bad car accident or something that actually happens to you and you are forced to work through it, I do think it has provided me a very freeing space, because you have to already go through those steps. We're looking at the coronavirus and we haven't had it yet. We're afraid of getting it. So for me, there's a lot of people who possibly aren't in a space where they've made a bed with non-attachment to possibly living forever.
Right.
And I do think that going through that process of making a bed with your own mortality really does kind of free you from fear of the abstract risks.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I thought it was interesting because I obviously thought about it a lot, and I am, at least I say, I am comfortable with the fact that I could get something and die. And I am comfortable that like I could be walking down the street, because quite frankly, there's so many people running. Like there could be a tragic running stroller accident where someone like bangs me because of how busy it is outside. So during the week, we only do this because we're social distancing. But on the weekend, we spend a lot of time in the vicinity of other people. So before I let you go, I wanted to show you a little tip. Oh,
I have an actual question for you though.
Okay. Wow.
Right.
Okay.
Do you want to share your tip first?
Yeah, this is a little coronavirus survival tip. If you're Zooming at home, right? And let's be honest, everyone is day drinking. So like the nation of children, like, I mean, usually you try and make it to like not at work, but so you're sort of walking. So what I've done is I have a coffee cup. Yeah. See this? So coffee cup. So the step one is you open the coffee cup and you take some dental floss. Okay. So you open the dental floss and you pull out a little, just like this. So dental floss, open it up. There we go. Then you hang it from the edge of your coffee cup. So like everyone knows, this is the universal sign for tea, right? So like that's tea. See that? That's tea. And then what you do is as you're having tea, you take your trusty tea, you open it, you pour it into your coffee mug, just like this, right? So we pour the tea. Then you close it like this. And then while you're on the conference call, everyone very clearly can see that you are in fact drinking tea when in fact you're not. Is that a good coronavirus survival tip?
Absolutely. Same as I'm probably in pajama pants right now, but business shirt on top.
Oh,
right?
you know
we
what's coming in?
We have to.
That is a post-coronavirus like fashion trend. Like first of all, like elastic bands as a waist is absolutely key. I haven't had to try on a pair of pants, but I am quite afraid as to like the zipper is going to be hanging on for dear life. And so I'm all about elastic pants, and I'm wearing some shorts myself. So okay, I didn't mean to cut you off. You had a question.
retail is essential for you now.
Retail, yeah, retail is essential. Elastic band retail. So, what do you got for me?
Okay, so here's my question, and this kind of follows this theme. So Texas, the state land board initiated a policy of waivers, waiving certain fees for non-payment, offering extensions on state leases. And I thought it was a really interesting kind of comparison to the position taken in Oklahoma, where we're effectively asking the government to take an action on non-governmental assets, which, to be clear, a declaration would be different than a regulation with respect to force majeure, but neither here nor there. And the BLM, I don't know if anybody saw, but the BLM just issued guidance on applying for suspensions on federal lands. And the policy is no more lenient than it would have been with or without COVID, which I find really interesting in this atmosphere where we're all kind of crying for help. We are stuck turning to the government and our regulatory bodies. And I think it's really just shown that the response is slow, and the response is frustrating, and the response is really less effective than we need it to be.
Right.
And it seems to me, could be off here, but I always hear you use the word, consolidation. And maybe you see this consolidation being instrumental in the future of the structure of our domestic industry. So as part of that consolidation, me being not a huge fan of regulation, do we at some point address that we need a collaborative mechanism for a consolidated industry point forward that takes some of these discussions out of the hands of government and puts it back in industry? Obviously, we have too many players right now, too much domestic competition, really not pragmatic. I listened to your episode with Dan Haley talking about how many associations we have,
right?
Like the associations of the associations of the associations, and how fragmented that is. And was musing about that as a possible avenue point forward if we really do start seeing heavy consolidation in basins. Do you then look to have an association possibly that could consolidate all of our micro associations, or do you create something new?
So let me take a shot at that. And appreciate you for joining, by the way. So thank you. And I'm going to take a shot. You can go back into the green room, and we're going to try and pivot. How's that, Glenn? Does that work? Okay. So to answer the question in terms of consolidation, look, I really struggle, and there was some commentary on some LinkedIn posts over the weekend that talked about free market versus government intervention. What role should government play in bailouts? Are bailouts important? What should the government do, or should companies just let it go? And I think production is a really good example. If government had acted as fast as I recommended, which was March 9th for everyone. I also was saying March 9th that we shouldn't have the lockdown, but data, everything plays out and we end up in the place 6 weeks later. But March 9th, regulators should have stepped in, shut down production, because they knew that this was coming. And that's a place where regulation matters. Currently, what's happening is everyone's going to shut down, demand's going to come back up, and then companies themselves are going to consolidate because there is no other option. They're not going to be drilling, and we'll talk about this more as the show goes on, but we were at 954 rigs at the beginning of 2019. We're now below 200 rigs, and below 200 rigs is sort of where we're going to sustain. So that means companies are just not going to have people doing capital, and they're not going to be spending money because oil is $12 a barrel. So they're going to come through, demand will come back, oil will start coming out of storage, and consolidation will be the natural fit. And we'll talk about like how whiting plays into that. I did a post on that this morning for Technical Tuesday as we get back to normal. But to your question on trade associations as well, yes, unfortunately, a lot of the trade associations and professional organizations are going to see membership drop because people have lost their job and for whatever reason, maybe retiring, depending on where they are, maybe, furloughing and not participating in these. So I think you're naturally going to see consolidation because your membership dues have to match the revenue. Otherwise, you're losing money. And governments are now experiencing that. We're going to talk about the governor of New Jersey, realizing that when tax revenue falls, the people that are paid for out of tax revenue have to be laid off, and there's no federal bailout for that. So what is the role in consolidation for government? Because we've been so slow acting, I don't really think there is a role. However, companies will naturally now start to consolidate because they're seeing the post-COVID world as we start to resume. They'll see where demand goes. They'll see what product prices are. They'll see profitability, and they'll have to make the decisions. And that's just what's coming. So appreciate the question, Breezy. Thank you for joining. Appreciate your insights as always on the shut-in, and I think the complexities around regulatory environments and how they play in. So that's that. Glenn, do we have anyone else in the back room or do we back room? The green room, I guess is what we call it, for questions? God's will, my man.
Hey, David, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well. How are you? Thanks for joining us again. You have another question. Fire away, buddy.
Wow, it seems like things are moving really fast in the oil patch. As we see, market speculators having to pay to exit their positions because they don't have anywhere to store the oil. Yeah. And with Diamond Offshore declaring bankruptcy, a well-known oil field economist forecast that Callon Petroleum, Chesapeake, and Occidental will follow suit, very quickly. We see the common thread as these companies, they have high level of debt, with some of them with debt as much as 4 times EBITDA, and they don't have much cash on hand, and they are overexposed in U.S. shale. My question is, will this rash of bankruptcies significantly affect the DNA of the oil patch in the long term, especially as they access private capital markets without debt obligations?
Yeah, that's a great question, Goswell. Thank you for joining us. It's great to see you again, and hopefully you'll come back to the next Q&A.
Appreciate it.
So how does the DNA mix up for the industry? I think Whiting is a great case study in that. So Whiting is the first company to go bankrupt. They had very high debt, as you talked about. That's one of the key challenges. We've been in a crisis of balance sheets, and the assets that they had didn't cover the size of debt. So by going through Chapter 11 and restructuring, even though a company that pre-bankruptcy didn't have the capacity to go do any mergers, any acquisitions, any growth, any long-term strategy, as the first to emerge, as their debt has been converted to equity, they'll be one of the most powerful buyers because everyone else is struggling with the sins of the past and they've wiped their slate clean. And so when you talk about DNA, there's going to be an element of Chapter 11s that lead to a Whiting, and in a basin like the Bakken, where majors have been exiting long before this. WPX had announced that they were going to get out. QEP had tried to sell their piece to Vantage, I believe it's certainly the Vantage team. That deal fell through, but people have been trying to exit the Bakken, and so there was a consolidation need. And now that Whiting is going through bankruptcy, as the first in the basin, they will be the consolidator. So I think that changes the DNA because private equity will likely sell to the company. They will take shares in that company because cash isn't available. And through that, Whiting will become a bigger, more consolidated company. And that will change the DNA of that basin. And I would expect to see the same in Oklahoma, in the DJ Basin, in the Permian to a lesser degree for a lot of different reasons. The majors are still there, but that's kind of how I see the DNA changing, and consolidation wave is really gonna happen. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that answers the question. Thank you very much. I just have one more comment or question before I exit. The FOMC, the Federal Reserve Open Market Committee, they're having a meeting today.
Yeah.
And they're looking at rates and looking at the gross domestic savings as it affects the social benefits and all that. This is going to be a very trying time for the entire economy. people are even looking at going as far as talking about demand destruction, looking at depression. What do you see, exiting probably say Q4, Q1 2021? What do you see will be highly impacted in terms of confidence in the market? Do you see a rebalancing of assets, or do you see the restoration of confidence in the market after this whole experience is over?
So, Goswell, good question. And I'll answer it starting with, there is a reason I drink during the day. Look, and I got in a little bit of a fight with my friend last night, not a physical fight, because obviously social distancing, so we sort of air dance to fight. I am really, really worried, and I'm going to tell you why. The market is pricing in some recovery. The numbers I'm hearing in Q2 are 30% down in GDP. Art Berman, who, if you don't follow, for an oil and gas commentator, really sharp guy, and again, their views, but he shares the same view as me, which is investment in oil in the US is dead, because there's a real chance that demand on oil could be sub 90 million barrels a day for a long time. Now, when I look at what we've done to our economy, we've traded 6 weeks of buying time for the hospitals to be able to manage more. And in exchange, we've put 26 million people out of work. We've put people 2 months behind in their rent. We've put companies 2 months behind in their rent. And we've put people behind, like landowners and small business owners. We've effectively chosen the winners, which are the Amazons and the Targets and the Costcos, who don't want the shutdown to end because they're as busy as they can be, and they're deemed essential. So they're the winners. But the losers are the hundreds of millions of people around the world that have started small businesses because they were told, take your nest egg, bet on yourself, put it all in, and go start a business. And because the government chose to lock everything down, those business owners are going to be wiped out. And then they're not going to be able to pay their mortgage, which is going to mean they're going to lose their house, which is mean the bank's going to take them and sell them like they did in 2008, which is going to depress property values. Income taxes are going to go down because a lot of people aren't going to go back to work. Like if you're furloughed, and I'll tell a story after I answer this, but if you're furloughed, there's a really high probability you're not going to go back to work. So it feels temporary, but Mark Rossano said on the thing, if you had 100 employees and you just got shut down for 6 weeks and you're just trying to survive, do you hire 10 back and wait a month, and then hire 10 more back and wait a month, and then hire 10 more back, and then discover you don't actually need as many people as you had because business is down and you're still in survival mode? So now 70% of your workforce no longer works, no longer pays income tax, no longer can afford their house. And so unfortunately, and I don't mean to be doomsday, but I think that people need to go in eyes wide open. There is a high probability, in my opinion, that we are going to enter the world's worst global depression since 1929. And it is going to lead to 10 years of absolute horrible economic wreckage. And the quality of life and the standard of living is going to drop. And Social Security is going to be cut. And Medicare is going to be cut. And pensions are going to be cut. And governments are going to raise taxes. And property values are going to be depressed. And school sizes are going to double. And hospitals are going to close. Now, I think there are solutions. And I want to give Breezy a shout out when she says that, don't bring problems, bring solutions. But in order for us to face this as a nation, we need to acknowledge that taxes, whether a Republican or Democrat gets in, taxes must go up because we're paying for these things, and social services must go down because there is a massive hole in the budget. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but God's will, it's always great to see you. Thank you for coming on again, and we'll look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you.
All right. So before we go to the next question, I wanted to carry on a little bit with that theory. I think people who know me and have known me for a very long time know that I love Starbucks. I love me some Starbucks. We started a Should I Use index early in 2019, which we bought companies and things that we used every day. So Google, Visa, Verizon, Starbucks, Costco, Target. It did well. It outperformed the S&P to the end of the year. And so I love me some Starbucks. But I walked over to Starbucks. It was the first time I've been back in Denver. You can see I'm back in the creepy basement studio. So things are getting normal. very excited to be back in Denver. Walked over to Starbucks, and the Starbucks near my house was closed. The reason it was closed is because Starbucks, as a business model, has chosen not to franchise Starbucks locations. So they open as many as they can to saturate the market all across Colorado Boulevard. And I would estimate there's probably 10 within a 10-mile stretch, roughly. And so they've closed selective locations to push traffic to their drive-ins, because as a large corporate that owns all of the stores, they can make those choices. But Einstein Bagels, which is half a block away from Starbucks, is a franchisee. And so someone at some point put the $35,000 is what I read online for the franchise fee, built out the thing, which can be as much as $1 million, but took a loan and started an Einstein Bagels franchise for their family. And that's what they were going to do. Compete with Starbucks, but locally owned, locally operated. The franchise model is everywhere. If you've seen The Founder, the McDonald's movie with Michael Keaton, it's pretty interesting to sort of see how McDonald's started in the franchise model. But went into the Einstein Bagels, and now because it's open, I've been going every day. And as I think about my personal choices post-COVID, I personally am going to choose to not shop at the companies that were chosen to be essential in the current pandemic. So I'm kind of done with Amazon. I'm going to try and avoid the Targets of the world. I'm going to avoid the Starbucks of the world, because we have small business owners that need to be supported. And so I'll use the Einstein Bagels. We asked, there are 15 people that work there. Business is down 65%. So even though it's still a coffee place and bagels and people would go, business is down 65%. And of the 15, they just hired back the third and fourth people. So their staff is down 75%. Einstein as a company offered through the furlough to continue to pay Medicare for people, which I think is amazing. And that franchise owner is now 2 months behind on their rent, 65% down in business, trying to bring back employees. And so my personal choice and my personal giving strategy post-COVID is I am going to support local small businesses, because it's the best way that I can see to support the economy in what I think is going to be a global depression. And in a global depression, I can't think about the larger world anymore outside the borders of the US. We have to think about inside the borders and what that's going to mean for business. But more importantly, I think, is to realize that as you start thinking about restarting your life and getting back and what businesses are going to work, what changes are going to be made, co-working space, probably not a great investment. Plexiglass building to separate people 6 feet, maybe that's the future. But to me, as I think about the world, I think about all of the people in New York State, in New Jersey, in California, that already have in Illinois, that already have massive state deficits. Very, 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 very high income taxes. And now many of the businesses that supported those people are going to be closed. And so when I think about winners and losers, I think about coastal, urban, high population, high tax states as losing. And I think about some of the Midwest and interior, Texas is an example, but Minnesota, Iowa, perhaps Colorado, as net winners, where taxes are generally lower. The quality of living in terms of the space and population density is better. And so as I'm starting to think about what businesses are going to work post-COVID, a big question is going to be starting where you start your business. What's the local economy going to be like? So just something to think about as you go. Glenn, do we have any questions from the live stream? You're on mute. Talk about technical difficulties.
Yeah, it threw me, and I'm still recovering. No, not at the moment. I was. You were going to start off on some of the other things you had mentioned today, like whiting, and then some additional items on your list of things. So
yeah, for sure.
Go there.
Let's talk about that. So I think we talked about whiting and really why. Look, there's certainly a lot of downsides for declaring bankruptcy in that the current equity owners lose everything. So that's not good. But there will be a difference between, and Nick and I, before we got on show, talked about this today. There's a difference between Chapter 11 and Chapter 7. And so when companies can do Chapter 11, they're going to emerge as the same vehicle with a new equity structure. Chapter 7 is really when they sell the business. So they deem the assets and is not a going concern. And so they enter bankruptcy, and then through a 363 sale, a court mandated sale, the assets get picked up by somebody else. So I think some of the people that declare bankruptcy early, and I'll use Chesapeake as an example. It's not investment advice. I'm not throwing anyone under the bus, but Chesapeake is likely to go bankrupt. Others are, but they'll emerge from bankruptcy with a totally new capital structure. And there will be teams in 6 months or 9 months that end up coming into the market that, the banks are going to say, I'm not going to support you. So we're going to convert our debt to equity, and we're going to do a merger. So it's effectively a Chapter 7. And the winners are going to come out on the other side. So it'll be kind of funny to see as these companies try and dissociate their former names so that no one knows. So Whiting will become Greening, and Chesapeake will become like the Bay or something. But they'll come out with these new names, and then as other companies fail through time, they will pick those up. So that touches on Whiting. Now, you want to talk about relative happiness, but absolute unhappiness. I'm going to see if I can share my screen here for a second. Share screen, flip to this bad boy. Where is it? Can you see that? Oh, it's a little slow. Oh, there we go. CDEV. CDEV in the last month is up from 25 cents to 82, which is a more than 300% move. Like many of the small cap oil companies, the reality, I've been saying this for a very long time, below 40, these companies are effectively worth zero. They're a blowdown case, which makes their asset value worth less than the debt. But at 25 cents, I've had a long position in CDEV since November. I strongly believed that the world was setting up for $60 oil this year for all the reasons. I didn't project coronavirus. I have no idea where long-term demand is going to go, and I have no idea what the viability of companies are. But this is option value. And if you're on LinkedIn and you get a chance to Google one of Eric Shaw's recent posts, he links back to a Twitter, an anonymous Twitter guy who I don't like to call out, but it is actually a pretty good stream. Talks about the option value of these companies and how they should trade. CDEV, we haven't had a good hashtag merge, CDEV merge for a couple of months because it hasn't, or a month at least, because since March 7th, the world changed. But one of the things I will say about CDEV that was creative, and I think you're going to see it more, was in the last week and a half or so, they came out and they're converting around $950 million worth of debt into around $500 million worth of debt, 450. Now, how are they doing that? They're basically saying if you own a bond, which is trading at 28 cents on the dollar. So if I buy a bond for $1,000 and I get 5% interest, that means I always pay $50 a year. And then the face value of that bond can go up or down to reflect the risk of payment back. So if that makes sense, if people felt like CDEV was going to go bankrupt because they had $1 billion worth of debt, they didn't have the cash flow to support that debt. And even though it was long dated, so they didn't have to pay it back until 2026 or 2027, people were very concerned that CDEV wasn't going to be a going concern. So the face value of those bonds traded down to $280. So from $1,000 face value to $280. They still pay $50 a year in interest at 5%, but the yield of that bond is 50 over 280, which is roughly 16%-ish, if I did the math right. What CDEV did was they have offered the bondholders $500 for their $1,000 bonds at a higher interest rate with a shorter term. So I'll say that again. they've offered $500 for people to redeem their $1,000 bonds. And in exchange, they will get a shorter maturity in 2025 instead of 2026. And they'll get between 7 and 8%, depending on which one they pick. Which the net effect of that is CDEV, if and when this closes in the middle of May, is going to reduce its debt by half. The obligation in terms of the interest payments will change a little. Interest rate went up, but the face value went down. So they've restructured their balance sheet. And as a result, it is less likely that they declare bankruptcy. And since April 19th, the stock has moved from 30 cents to 82. Now, that is the relative good news. Of course, the absolute good news was I bought, way back here, and I was feeling pretty good when the Iranian general was assassinated at the beginning of January. So in absolute terms, the equity has been crushed by any stretch of the imagination in any oil and gas company, and especially small caps. You can see that we've moved down from, in this particular case, it's basically down 85%. But, as an equity holder, I'm not advocating that you buy it, and I'm not selling mine personally because all the loss is done. And so it is an option value. But what I am encouraged by, and also I'll stop sharing my screen now, but what I am encouraged by is that companies are going to start converting debt in a similar way to CDEV, which is going to lower their net obligation, and it's going to make them healthier financially so that their equity will retain some value, which I think will accelerate the speed at which a company like CDEV could merge with another company in basin to consolidate G&A, get a better balance sheet, convert more debt to equity. And through that process, we'll see more consolidation. So wanted to touch on that. I thought it was interesting. And if you have questions on that, you can always email me. Wanted to talk about a video that was circulating on YouTube. It was some doctors. I don't know if everybody saw it. 5 million people saw it, for whatever that means. But it was two doctors in California had a press conference, and they were analyzing the data as we do, as I do, as many commentators do, and said, what is the coronavirus in terms of does it justify a shutdown? What are the percentages, et cetera, et cetera. Now, in my particular opinion, I thought that the way they interpreted the percentage of positive tests was incorrect. So let me explain. In the case where in Colorado, where we've done 100,000 or so tests, and 20,000 of those tests were positive, what the doctor said was that meant that 20% of the population was infected. Scale that up to the number of residents in Colorado, and then scale the deaths to come up with a fatality, and that's your number. Now, you end up at the same net result in terms of the statistics, but we've seen it on the Diamond Princess. It's 3,700 passengers, 700 got sick, which meant that 20% of the population in a closed loop system were infected, and 1% of the 700 died, and they were all an older comorbidity high risk. And when Dr. Ioannidis from Stanford looked at those numbers in March, he could project that the actual fatality rate was 0.1% in early March, at the same time as the World Health Organization was saying 3.4%. If you look at the study in Chelsea, Massachusetts, where they randomly picked 200 people to see who was infected, they found that approximately 30% of people were infected, many were asymptomatic. In New York, they took a random sampling of people, and they saw that 15% were already infected. In the state of New York, I think there's 20 million people. Certainly in the city of New York, there's 12. So 15% of that implies 1.5 million people have it. You look at the deaths in New York City, use the math, and it all triangulates to a 0.1-ish% fatality rate, targeting people who are older than 65 with comorbidities, who are the ones that every year die. And so they were advocating, and I'm not making the point, but they were advocating that the shutdown, A, could have been done more surgically, and I think I've been saying this for 6 weeks, but I think people are now coming around to that. Like, city of New York is 28,000 people per square mile, and the city of Los Angeles is 8. And Iowa, there's like a farm and then a farm. Should rural areas have been locked down in the same way as urban areas? Probably not. Should people under 50 who weren't going to ever invade the hospitals with their sickness because it just wasn't happening that frequently, should we have locked them in their house while we protected everyone else? Look, whatever you believe the case to be, in the flattening the curve, the goal was to get the medical system ready for a surge. That surge in almost all places never happened. And so we're reopening the economy in varying degrees. The reason I raised all of that is not to talk about coronavirus, but they shared a very similar press conference, and YouTube decided to ban that as not in the social good and took that information off. Now, can you still find it? Of course. But YouTube took the video down. And I have a real problem with the way that our country is going when, if you don't like the data that you're hearing and it doesn't reaffirm your view, you stop it, you turn the channel from CNN to Fox, or you block that person on Twitter. Or if you're YouTube, one of the largest media companies in the world, you drive the narrative because you don't want people talking about the economic cost of the shutdown. That to me is absolutely crazy. And it scares me about the precedent that's being set, which is going to make it very hard for new small business owners to start a business. If they believe that they could be shut down at any time for any reason, now that the precedent is set, what does that mean for the future of our country and to the V-shaped recovery that seems to be priced into the market? So I see Jordan. Jordan, what's going on, man? Glenn, can you bring that up? So for those who are listening and not seeing, outside of Silicon Valley, tech, and obviously outside of oil and gas, what will be some emerging bright spots in the post-COVID economy specific to engineering services? Jordan, that's a great question. The way that I think about, and as I'm thinking about restarting the economy, not me personally, but in terms of the economy restarting, I think about the skills that an engineering person brings, especially when they've had a background in oil and gas. We have very complex regulatory environment. We have health and safety as priority number one always. The safety card is, if there is a risk to human life, you shut down and do something different. You work with the engineering staff, you work with finance staff, you work with accounting, you work with land, you work with contracts, you work with marketing. You work in a very complex regulatory environment with huge technical expertise. And at the end of the day, the most important thing that we do is to make money. Now, we can define that the business model didn't do a very good job at that, but that was what we were focused on. And so with that skill set, I think, and you get a call at 2 a.m. because, you've lost a bit, and you can trip, or you can sidetrack, or you can abandon the hole, and it's going to cost this, and you do this quick analysis at 2 a.m. in 3 minutes and come up with an answer. And when the data is different, you make a different decision. So I think, as I look about post-COVID and the world restarting and everyone is rehiring, the skills that engineers and landmen and geologists and accounting and finance bring from oil and gas is huge data, very, very important decisions, and huge capital at risk. So as companies are thinking about their own personal survival in the post-COVID world and how they need to transition their business model, do I need plexiglass in front of all my registers? Should I get rid of the cash registers and move to self-checkout? Should I give people a smartphone where they can scan things? And how do I have a weigh scale so I can see if they're stealing items? Like, what is the way forward? I really believe that oil and gas people who love our industry and have stayed in our industry for as long as they have the ability to pivot into another industry and bring all of those skills and problem solving forward. And it's going to be so valuable because in a recession economy, there's a lot of people that are probably finding out that their staff weren't that good, and they're Zooming and they're not producing any product. I think we can probably say that. Or they're getting sidetracked. So how much upskilling is going to happen in the industries that remain? And that our oil and gas people can go and get those jobs because they are a better talent than the ones that were there before. So that is my hope for the future. As I said earlier in the show, I am concerned about the fact that government picked the winners and the losers. And I feel like Amazon, and John Oliver did a segment on this, Amazon is allowed to sell sex toys. They are. And so a essential worker is in the warehouse and goes to the aisle with the sex toys, whatever those are, reaches up, grabs it, and ships it to your house. And so Amazon makes profit off of the sale of sex toys because they're an online business and it's deemed safe. Yet the Fascination store down the street is closed because sex toys are deemed a non-essential service. And yet, it's been a very, very, very long time since I've been in one of those stores. Probably, let's go 25 years. Let's go with that. When I was last in there, everyone was at least 6 feet from each other, looking down at the ground, trying to make sure no one else was anywhere near their vicinity while they were doing their shopping. So if we want to have social distancing and we want to have fair commerce where people who are essential services can be sold on Amazon, but that store is about the safest social distancing store I could possibly imagine. And so what I've realized is in the e-commerce world, apparently you're not allowed to have a brick and mortar business, and Amazon was selected as a winner. So obviously we're trying to move a little bit of commerce where we're going to start reintroducing the world, and we're going to think of different channels and ways to sell things. So Jordan, to your question, I think that's what we have to think about is what states are going to win, what states are going to lose, what business models are going to win, what business models are going to lose, and how do we position that business like a sex toy business? Should it be only online? Should it sell only through Amazon? Should it start its own store? Should it have social distancing so that the next time there's a shutdown, they say, look, we're already socially distanced. We have one-way traffic and curbside pickup or whatever it is. So that's what I think is going to come. Hypothetical scenario. Is there a scenario where the U.S. shale fight for survival drives innovation and cost cutting to a competitive tipping point? Can shale be the greatest oil and gas comeback story in history? So I'm going to go with no on that, and I'm going to tell you why. So obviously, oil and gas, there is a fundamental structure. And so one could argue that service companies' service rates were inflated for 2019 because we were running 945 rigs and we were running 350 frac spreads. But there is a physical cost to this equipment. And so maybe costs come down 10 or 15%, maybe. But we've already got to the end of frac capability. We were at 2,500 pounds and we backed it off because all of the science that I did over the course of One Energy and my career before that showed that, and again, this is a generalization, so there are some specifics, but generally 1,800 to 2,200 pounds per foot generated the correct EUR per foot that was not exceeded by going to a larger. Now, did you get maybe more IP, blah, 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 but from everything I did with all the spacing studies, we were maxed out on completion technology. We always improve. The Bakken is drilling wells much faster, and bid technology will marginally improve, but we're going to be running 75% less rigs. So are we really going to see that much more given how much technology we've already used? I don't think so. And then the last point is, if you believe we need $50 to $60 a barrel, Saudi and Russia have now shown that they will snap their fingers, just like the government might shut you down if you're a small business owner. Russia and Saudi might snap their fingers and cause what's happened to the U.S. There's a real probability that the U.S. is going to decline from almost 13 million barrels a day to, including shut-ins, less than 7. There's also a real probability that global demand after COVID in a recession scenario like I'm talking about could be 85 to 90 million barrels a day, which means that the entire world needs to come down 15%. The US will be 6%. There will be hardly any companies left. There will be hardly any service companies going, and the technology is already maxed out. So do I personally see a shale revolution that makes us more competitive? No. I believe that we are the marginal barrel and that the large guys like Exxon and Chevron are going to start going international, because international barrels will be cheaper than the barrels that we can bring in the US. And perhaps the rule of law risk that used to exist is going to be offset by the fact that you just can't make money in the sub 50 world in the United States. So not that hopeful on technology, which ties back to Jordan's. How do we reinvent ourselves in a post-COVID world to find new businesses, bring problem solving, and bring solutions to the new world order? Anything else, Glenn?
No, I think we're going to wrap it up at this point, David, unless there's anything else you want to mention.
No. Sorry about the technical difficulties there at the beginning of the show. We pivoted, right? Sometimes weird things happen and you got to react and respond, solve the problem, change the camera, change the angle, and go forward. That's just what we're living with in the COVID world.
Thanks, David.
All right. Until next time, be safe, be good, have a great day, and bye for now.